Another little kind of a hidden one is, do they have plans for the next day? That's an odd one, right? Where I've asked, what are your plans for tomorrow? And if they struggle with telling you exactly what they're going to do the next day, all right, that's a data point. Mark that up, understand that. Usually tenacious people will know that. Well, hello and welcome to the J. Sterling Hughes Show, where we share how we have built our family law practice from 0 to 25 attorneys and over $15 million in revenue in our first 10 years of existence. My purpose here is to document what's working and what's not working in our practice, with hopes that you can take that and you can recontextualize that for your practice and shorten your success curve. My name is Jeff Hughes, and I'm your host. And today we're talking about the number one attorney hiring attribute to grow your law practice. So let me give you some context here. Over our first 10 years, I have interviewed literally hundreds of attorneys. I've probably screened well over 1,000 resumes at this point. Through all of that, we have hired 68 attorneys, of which 25 are still with us today. So I have seen those who have not made it in our practice for many different reasons, some of which are on them, some of which are on us. And I've seen 25 that have excelled and continue to excel in our practice. I can see patterns now after having that many at-bats. And there is one attribute that sticks out head and shoulders clearly above all the others, and that is the attribute of tenacity. So in this show, I'm going to talk about what is it? Like, how does that actually show up in a candidate and an attorney in your firm? Secondly is why? Why is this the number one attribute among all of them that we could pick from and choose from? Why is this number one? And third is, and probably most importantly, right? How do you find this in candidates and in attorneys that join your practice? So first, what is it? What is tenacity? You can call this drive. You can call it grit, right? There's books written on grit. You can call it mental toughness. And in some circumstances, you could even call it ambition, I guess. But those definitions, or those synonyms of drive, grit, and mental toughness, seem to really articulate what this tenacity is. This is someone who just persists, who doesn't give up, who tends to always find a way. And after seeing all of these attorneys, not only in our practice, but in the hundreds of other attorneys that I interact with over the years that I've interacted with, drive, ambition, tenacity is the one attribute that really does rule them all. Now, it's important to mention that as you're selecting attorneys for your practice, this attribute of tenacity, this does come after table stakes. Now, what are table stakes? Now, table stakes are the values in your practice. Like in our practice, we have 4 defined values, and we look for candidates and we screen for candidates that those values are just natural in them. They just surface in who they are. It shows up in how they conduct themselves, how they interact with people, how they approach their career, how they approach their practice. So those are table stakes. You got to have those to start with. And there's also the table stakes of just having good character. You're not a bad person. You're honest. You're a person of integrity. Those are all table stakes. You got to have those, right? So I'm not saying that tenacity is superior and senior to those things. Tenacity comes after those, but table stakes are in every practice, and it should be in every hiring decision that you make. But on those kind of elective qualities, let's call those elective attributes, tenacity is the one that rules them all. And they come above some other attributes that get a lot more attention and get a lot more press. Now, I hear attorneys talk about hiring those with experience, and experience is certainly important. And for some areas of the practice, it's critical. You got to have these things. In our practice, in family law, tenacity to me comes far above experience, because you can pick up experience, you can learn experience pretty quickly. But if you don't have tenacity, you're in for a hard row, because it is just going to be tough to succeed without that. It also comes above intelligence, grades, pedigree, certainly above pedigree. In fact, I think pedigree is a negative in my experience. Hiring and interviewing folks that have gone to these real prestigious elite law schools, even hiring a couple along the years, they haven't worked well in our environment. And they probably are great in other firms, especially some of these big B2B silk stocking type firms. But in the rough and tumble world of, law firm directly dealing with clients that are people, not like businesses, people law, Having a high pedigree tends to bring along a lot more baggage that makes success in this type of law practice really feasible. It comes above, all of these hard skills that we see. If you go to your state bar website, for example, there's always like this career page on that people post, and we do too, post for looking for attorneys and hiring ads and so forth. It tends to be, send us your writing samples, send us your grades, send us your resume and all those sort of things. And I'm telling you, Tenacity comes, I don't even care about grades. I never even ask about grades because there's almost zero correlation between someone who gets really good grades in law school and someone who's really good with people. There's not a correlation there. I have not seen that. Now, certainly some of our attorneys have gotten fantastic grades and do fantastically well, but there's just as many who have been like me in the bottom rung of the class who managed to do really well with people, managed to have high levels of empathy and compassion, and they're really strong in these soft skills that really matter in family law. So tenacity comes above all of those things. So I've also found that attorneys with tenacity tend to be very strong on persistence. And with persistence, you can always find a way. I've heard it said, and we've all heard it said, that talent is where you start, persistence determines where you finish. And that is absolutely true in the practice of law. Tenacious attorneys always find a way to get better. They can close those gaps really quick, and they tend to be much more coachable because they have a level of self-awareness about them. This isn't universal. I'm not saying that it is, but they tend to have an ability to be more coachable and to take feedback, implement that feedback, which is very difficult to do. That's what I have found tenacity to be, those things. So number 2, why is tenacity the number one attribute to rule them all? We all have gaps, right? Gaps that show up in a lot of different ways, from experience, ability gaps, maybe even intelligence gaps. We don't retain information as much and as well as others do. We don't assimilate that information as well as others do, so much more naturally. It could show up in a lot of ways there with intelligence, where we have gaps. There's also empathy gaps. Those are soft people skill gaps, leadership gaps, self-awareness gaps. We all have them in various shades and sizes. And someone who has a high level of tenacity tends to shore those gaps up quicker. They see them and they go after them with this vigor to close that gap. Now, I remember whenever I started practicing, this goes back to 1997. Okay, so that tells you how long I've been around. So going back to 97, I remember that I had almost zero mentoring within the law practice, especially after that first year and a half when one of our attorneys, Eric Zeski, left, who was kind of my primary mentor. I didn't have a lot. So I knew that I was deficient in some real key lawyering areas. And one of those was in the area of cross-examination. And so back then I somehow found a book, and I don't think it was on Amazon. I don't know if Amazon was even much of a thing back then, but I found a book on cross-examination, ordered it, it came in the mail. And I remember reading that thing over and over and over again because I wanted to get better and I wanted to shore that gap up because I was tenacious after that. I knew I had to get better as a lawyer. And so those types of lawyers who have that tenacity will shore those gaps up quicker. Now, I've seen this also show up in our practice, where in the family law practice, the ability to have and project empathy to a client, that's almost like a superpower in family law. And I know, like for me and for others in our practice, it doesn't come naturally. For others, it's supernatural. They just get it. They can feel what the client is feeling. And so there are a lot of ways to shore that gap up. And I have seen attorneys in our practice understand that they have empathy gaps, and they will take recommendations on books, on other resources to shore those gaps up, and they'll do it quickly. So that's what I've seen with these tenacious attorneys do. So tenacious attorneys also find a way to win quicker. They just keep looking for that solution, that path, that workaround, whatever it takes, and they don't quit until they find that. Those attorneys are special. Also, when we started the law firm, this goes back 10 years now, I remember reading as much as I could find on how to start, how to build, how to grow a law practice, because I had been out of the practice of law at that point about 6 or 7 years. And, I was rusty on a lot of things. I found a book by a personal injury attorney by the name of John Morgan. He runs like a personal injury practice based out of Orlando, Florida, I believe. And I don't know how many states they're in today, but a lot, like over 10. In fact, I was just in Michigan recently on a trip with my kids for a piano recital, and I remember seeing his billboards up there in Michigan, and I know they started in Florida. They're all over the South, and so I wouldn't be surprised if it's well more than 10 by now, but regardless. So he's built this massive personal injury practice, and he wrote this book called You Can't Teach Hungry. I remember reading that. I don't remember anything in the book, but one thing is that the point and the thesis of the book is that the most difficult thing to find and coach and to have in a lawyer is fire in the belly. And he called it hungry. You can't teach hungry. And boy, I remember that, and I have seen that come true time and time again in our practice. So from a practical standpoint, tenacious attorneys, they tend to perform at a higher level than their peer group. They trailblaze. And that is so important to a growing practice. An example of that would be in our practice early on when we switched to fixed fee. So this goes back to 2016. We went from hourly to fixed fee. And there was one attorney then named Holly Mullen, and she's still with us. She's one of our managing partners today, one of our top leaders in our practice. And she was reluctant when I went to her and said, "Hey, Holly, would you consider doing fixed fee? Because that's what I want to shift the firm to." And within the first couple months, she mastered how to articulate the value of fixed fee, sell her services, and also how to optimize the collections of that and how to optimize the actual practice of that with delegation and so forth. And she trailblazed. She showed the other attorneys how to do that. And once one attorney stepped up with her level of tenacity and showed how it's done, others, they believed in it themselves and could follow. And so for us, that initial trailblazing that this tenacious attorney brought into our practice was absolutely key and pivotal. And I've seen that repeat itself over the years. So as we've grown and as we've learned more about how to serve clients through fixed fee, we've had other attorneys that, like Jeff Morrell, who have set that bar and reset that bar higher and higher again. We are really focused right now on client service and on having a high net promoter score. Katie Van Duzen has been one of the consistent year after year after year after year leaders, among others, of course, in our practice. But she's constantly set that bar really, really high and trailblazed because she is so tenacious when it comes to taking care of a client and serving them and wanting to do a good job with her communication with them. That's why this idea of tenacity is the most important one of all that we look for in hiring. So number 3, how do you find it? How do you identify this in candidates, right? So first off, I don't mean to be a letdown here, but there is no foolproof way to get this. It's kind of like in baseball, right? Where a batter who bats over 300 is like on the all-star team, and someone who bats 350 is in the Hall of Fame. So that's like failing 65% of the time. That's what it's like with interviewing lawyers and looking for tenacious lawyers. It is tough. And what I'm going to share with you here, I'm going to give you the neighborhood that these attorneys reside in. But you're going to have to knock on a whole lot of doors to get enough on your team to really make a difference. And it may be just one or two that do that. So there's no foolproof way. This is about getting in proximity with who they are, where they're at, how to identify them. And of course, this comes after table stakes, right? Again, I want to point out, tenacity is not senior to values. It's not senior to character. It's not senior to integrity. So first off, I believe that you have to have it yourself so you can recognize it, so you can smell it whenever it comes across your path. And if you struggle with it, it's something that you've got to shore up. You've got to get better at so you can identify it. It's much easier to see that in others when you have it in yourself. Also, in our practice, every candidate that comes into our practice takes or sits for a self-assessment. It's a 2-question assessment called Predictive Index. And this is a tool that we use. It's not foolproof by any means, but it helps us at least kind of narrow the field a little bit to try to find these tenacious, these gritty, mentally tough attorneys. Another similar one is Culture Index. I know there's many more out there, but these are assessments that candidates take and they self-identify as to who they are. They describe who they are through this. It's one useful tool that we use, and it's been something that has, I think, been very directionally accurate over the years on an aggregate basis, not on a specific basis for sure. So as you're going through the interview process and the screening process, and you're trying to identify those really mentally tough, gritty, tenacious attorneys, there's certainly questions that you can ask that helps kind of narrow the field a little bit, that are drive-oriented, grit-oriented type of questions. So I like questions like, tell me a time when you did X, Y, Z, or you pushed through, or you persevered. You're looking for times when the odds were stacked against them and they push through, and they may not always succeed, but they push through, to kind of give you a sense for what they're willing to do to overcome obstacles, to succeed, to get what they want. Another question I like to ask is, give me the 5 things that you value the most in life. Usually you're going to get family, you're going to get, experiences or something like that. But usually that 4th or 5th thing, if you can push for that and get them to describe it, will be somewhat indicative of someone who drives or pushes through it. At least it'll tell you a little bit about what their level of persistence might be in those things. Another one I look for is, I love to find competitors, people that have athletically competed, people have competed in other venues. If they have a long history of competition, that's really, really good. And especially if they don't have a natural talent for those things, that can tell you that they'll find a way to win. It doesn't always look like they've won one in that particular competitive environment, but people who've competed, I love to find really those athletes that have competed, or in other areas, of course. I look for people who are organized. I found that really tenacious people tend to be organized because they have to keep sharpening where they're putting their focus. And so being organized avoids those distractions. Another little kind of a hidden one is, do they have plans for the next day? That's an odd one, right? Where I've asked, what are your plans for tomorrow? And if they struggle with telling you exactly what they're going to do the next day, all right, that's a data point. Mark that up, understand that. Usually tenacious people will know that. Again, you got to put these all together and check as many boxes as you can. The more boxes you check, the better. I like to look for folks who have been beat up in life, who are coming from kind of the lower rungs of that socioeconomic status, who have maybe grown up with not much, who have been beat around a little bit, who have been kicked in the face. It's just tougher to be tenacious coming out of those environments where you didn't have to work for so much. It was all given to you, it was all handed to you, and that sort of thing. Now, there are exceptions to all of this. I'm not sweeping this with a broad brush. There are people who have grown up in those environments that are just driven and hungry, and there are people who have grown up with nothing who have a victim mentality, right? Everything is about oppressing them, okay? Again, you got to look for the aggregate of these things. But I love those candidates who have had to struggle and push and push and push. One of the ideal candidates for us for hiring for lawyers is someone who was a paralegal first, and they just had to push through that. They had to get their paralegal license. Then they had to take night school for 6 years to get through law school. And they finally became a lawyer. And maybe they had a family on the side as they did this. So I love that story, that story. You've seen it in immigrants, right? Immigrants who come here, who don't have much, what is their likelihood to become millionaires is like 4 times as likely as a native who's grown up here or something like that. I've seen stats like that. So those are all good qualities to look for when you're trying to find that tenacious, driven, gritty type of attorney. As you're going through the interview process, anything that smells like or that looks like an entitlement mentality, my goodness, run from that. If someone has an entitlement mentality in some way, some fashion or another, that wipes out all of the other qualities that may indicate ambition, that may indicate that tenacity that you're looking for. Entitlement people, man, they have no place in any practice if they feel entitled just because they're a lawyer or something. I remember one time we hired a lawyer, and this guy, I was so excited with him coming in because I thought he had it all. That drive that he wanted to beat his brother it was a big thing that I remember sticking out in the interview process. His brother was a successful attorney, and he wanted to show that it can be done. And within that first week, he was condescending to the paralegals, the legal assistants. So the entitlement mentality just came to the surface. And oddly, this came back to me later. I didn't know about this at the time, but he spent more time trying to get the Netflix in the office to work than he did to get his practice going in that first week, which I thought was like, who cares about having Netflix at work? You're there to work, not to watch, not to binge on some TV show or something. Regardless, okay. So that entitlement mentality is an absolute killer to tenacity. I also believe, and I've seen, that tenacious, gritty, mentally tough attorneys, they tend to be more humble. They just tend to have more of a self-awareness about themselves. And this is of course, the opposite of entitlement mentality, but that quality tends to show up more, I think, in really tenacious, driven people, because they know they don't have it all and they have to figure out a way to win. And so I think that's That's a correlation that I've seen. They also look for an edge everywhere. One area that I believe this shows up is how they present themselves. If they present themselves professionally and they do everything they can to kind of smooth out their rough edges and try to win that client's confidence, those are small little edges that build up. So if they dress like a bum and they're careless with their emails and their texting, that is not a tenacious attorney. That is someone who's probably pretty lazy and doesn't want to do those little things that it takes to win. I remember when I first started practicing, I was young looking. I don't think I was 25 years old, or even maybe even 25. I think I was 24 when I first started practicing. I remember going out and buying fake glasses and trying to grow a goatee because I thought that might make me look a little bit older. And back then everyone wore suits and ties, but I always wore a jacket and a tie cinched up with my top button buttoned and all those sort of things to try to present as someone who was competent and try to overcome this lack of experience and youthfulness that I had. So lastly, when it comes to interview process, I have found great success in spending as much time as that candidate can muster in talking about their failures. Number one, we all have them. Everybody has failures, and we all remember them. We remember them more than our wins, those times when we strived and ultimately failed. And the more you can get out of a candidate talking about their failures and what they did to overcome them the next time around, or work around them, or how they dealt with them, or how they failed forward, or whatever the case is, that is a strong indicator of an attorney who's willing to push through and be tenacious in order to get what the client needs to serve that client to win or whatever. So I hope these sharings, these experience sharings that I have here are helpful to you as you look to build your practice and as you look to hire attorneys that are tenacious, that are gritty, and that are mentally tough. Have a great week.